On peut commencer ça. Bonjour, bienvenue à tous. Hello and everyone to all. I'm Boris Prou, reporter at Le Devoir, and welcome to this press conference. We have today two members of Parliament, Michael Cooper and Michael Barrett, and other speakers that I will let them introduce them later on. Nous avons donc nos deux députés, Michael Cooper et Michael Barrett, ainsi que d'autres invités en virtuel. I'll invite all the reporters on the line to feel free to use the raise hand function at any moment during the press conference, and we will take some questions after a few remarks. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're here today because the Special Joint Committee on Medical Assistance in Dying is currently studying a statutory review of the provisions of the Criminal Code related to medical assistance in dying and their application. I'm joined by my colleague, Michael Cooper, a Member of Parliament, as well as a number of individuals who would like to share their stories. Aaron Smith, Alicia and Christy Duncan, and Gary and Trish Nichols, all of whom have lost members of their family to MAiD, and they'd like to share their personal stories. The context under which this review is happening is very important. The Quebec National Assembly studied this issue in detail for 6 years, and the Liberal government wants this review completed in a matter of weeks. Motion 11 just passed the House, which has already caused the cancellation of one of our meetings, and this committee stands to be canceled on any Monday that the House now sits until midnight. Despite our efforts, the committee study of the MAiD regime in Canada has ignored the voices of victims, even in the face of clear and well-reported stories of people who have suffered because of non-compliance with the MAiD safeguards. The Liberal government needs to uphold the obligation of being accountable to Canadians and work with all members of the committee to ensure this parliamentary review is both thorough and transparent. So we're here today to give a voice to Canadian families who are victims of the lack of enforcement of MAiD safeguards. Before we turn it over to them, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Michael Cooper.
Good morning. Cases of abuse, coercion, and non-compliance with so-called safeguards under Canada's medical assistance in dying regime are not a hypothetical. They are real, they are happening, and they are documented, including by Quebec's Commission on End-of-Life Care, as well as the Ontario Chief Coroner's Office, both of which reviewed several thousand cases and identified instances of non-compliance with the law, more specifically, non-compliance with the criminal code. Last month, there was a disturbing case out of London, Ontario, in which a 51-year-old woman who was having difficulty finding adequate housing terminated her life under MAiD, notwithstanding that her condition was not irremediable as required by law. Rather, she was vulnerable, desperate, and had given up hope on living. And then, just a few weeks ago, the RCMP in Abbotsford, British Columbia, have launched a police investigation in the case of Donna Duncan, who accessed MAiD under questionable circumstances. Her daughters are with us today to talk about her case. Under Bill C-14, there was supposed to be a retrospective review. That retrospective review was to, first and foremost, look at safeguards, look at the provisions under Canada's medical assistance in dying regime to determine how they were working. Thanks to the Liberals, and their lack of transparency and willingness to be accountable, that review didn't take place before the Liberals moved full steam ahead with Bill C-7 to radically expand MAiD in Canada. We are now on a review of medical assistance in dying, a special joint committee. Unfortunately, the committee is structured right now in such a way that we are looking at ways to expand medical assistance in dying without looking at the lay of the land. I say that that is putting the cart before the horse. We need to understand how safeguards are working and address issues of non-compliance. We owe it to vulnerable Canadians whose lives are being placed at risk due to the absence of compliance. And for this committee to have any credibility, we must hear from witnesses, including victims and family members of victims of Canadians who have fallen through the cracks. And that is why I have put forward a motion yesterday at the special joint committee to undertake 6 hours of study to review existing safeguards and to hear from witnesses surrounding instances of non-compliance. That is a very modest request. It's the least that the committee can do in order to prepare a fulsome report. And with that, we will now hear from family members of vulnerable Canadians who have fallen through the cracks under the medical assistance in dying regime, starting with Aaron Smith.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Smith, and I'd like to thank you for allowing me to speak today. My family and I had the horrible and traumatic experience of losing my father through MAiD and their assisted suicide program. You see, my father, who was in his 70s, was admitted to our local hospital for a fall. During his stay, he contracted C. diff, which is a diarrhea illness that you get sometimes from being at the hospital. He was never given the proper medications to get rid of it. The staff made him, feel that he just wasn't wanted there. So they were making inappropriate comments to him. They would not change him or help him to the washroom. And they would leave him in the room with the smell for hours. They made it clear that they did not want to care for him. And it made him feel that he was more, of a nuisance to them. While there, he developed and struggled with some shortness of breath, and he was in horrible pain. The hospital had not been providing him with his normal pain medications, so he was also experiencing some withdrawal from those medications. So all along, the doctors had been planning for his discharge. That was the original plan. He was going home. And that changed when a hospital staff suggested that he would qualify for MAiD and told him all about the program. The MAiD team made up a diagnosis so that he would qualify, because part of MAiD, you need to have a terminal illness. The MAiD team had told him that he had end-stage COPD, which surprised him, and it surprised us, as he had never been diagnosed with this before. So my dad was very old school, where you just didn't, question your medical professionals, and you just accepted what they told you. So he accepted this diagnosis. We, though, his family, questioned the diagnosis, but our questions went unanswered. The MAiD procedure was booked before Dad had his second assessment, so they already scheduled it. And then the procedure occurred within 48 hours of his first assessment. So it was very fast and very rushed. My dad made his decisions with inaccurate information provided to him by the medical staff. There were no specialists involved, and worse still, his family doctor was never consulted. She didn't even know what was happening, and she did not believe that he had end-stage COPD. My father died with poorly controlled shortness of breath, diarrhea, and in pain from the medical neglect. So we were very heartbroken with this. We did have an MRI autopsy performed, which also showed that my dad never had end-stage COPD. So why did this happen? Why was this so rushed? Why was there not a team of professionals that MAiD consulted with? My understanding was that MAiD was to be used for the terminally ill, not to get rid of people in hospital or to reduce costs of the healthcare system, in which I feel that this was the case of my dad. He had been at the hospital for about a month and just had horrible treatment. So my dad and my family are victims of MAiD and the MAiD program. I'm without my dad now, who I loved incredibly. I loved him so dearly. And I'm left with all the trauma through this experience from it all. So that is my dad's story. That is our story. I thank you for allowing us to share it with you. It was just a horrible experience, and I'm heartbroken by it.
Thank you, Erin. And now I will welcome the daughters of Donna Duncan, Alicia, and Christy Duncan.
Yeah. My name is Alicia Duncan, and together with my sister Christy, we are sharing our story with you today as an example of what can happen under the current legislation regarding medical assistance in dying. In March 2020, our mother was in a car accident and suffered a concussion. Over the next few months, her condition appeared to improve slightly. However, that fall, we noticed a general decline in her health, with the most concerning being a significant loss in weight. Test after test ruled out any possible medical explanation. Her behavior also shifted, with an increase in obsessive compulsive behavior, angry outbursts, and depressed mood. On October 24th, 2021, we were shocked to find out that our mom had applied for and been approved that day to end her life through MAiD. She was scheduled to die less than 48 hours later. We believed, which was later confirmed through medical records, that she had not followed through with any recommended treatments prescribed by her general practitioner, and that our mother was suffering from depression. We were granted a mental health warrant to delay her death pending a psychiatric assessment. However, as a highly experienced psychiatric nurse, our mom knew all the correct terms to ensure she was found sound of mind. On October 29th, within hours of being released from a psychiatric unit, our mom, at the age of 61, was killed through medical assistance in dying. Since her death, we have been able to extensively review her medical records and have discovered that the diagnosis for which she received MAiD had never been confirmed by a specialist as safeguard that is legislated in Bill C-7. My sister and I have supported the initiation of the first police investigation into a MAiD death. We are appalled that, unlike many other government approvals, there is currently no independent review of a doctor's assessment for MAiD approval. Imagine a contractor decides to build a high-rise and the city doesn't review the application to ensure a structural engineer has signed off on the drawings. MAiD practitioners are not currently required to use standard criteria during their patient evaluations, nor do they require an independent third-party review to confirm the validity of the application. It is imperative that these safeguards ensure vulnerable people are provided care as a first option, not death. We cannot understand how activist doctors can justify access to specialists taking months or years, yet access to dying can take just days. This is a direct indication of a broken healthcare system, and killing patients who have the possibility of recovery is not the answer. Our mom's temporary suffering ended, but now we will suffer a lifetime without her. Help us ensure that her death was not in vain, and our experience helps guide a legislation that protects the vulnerable.
Thank you, Alicia and Christy. And now I would like to recognize and welcome Gary and Trish Nichols.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting us to attend. I'm speaking on behalf of Gary today. He left his reading glasses at work. The existing MAiD requirements for assessing a person's ability to apply for MAiD need serious attention. My brother, Alan Nichols, received assisted suicide in 2019 when MAiD was reserved for those whose death was reasonably foreseeable. The doctors let our depressed brother die based on a diagnosis of deafness, which is not terminal. How can our government keep allowing and expanding MAiD with still so many cases of wrongful death? Alan did not meet the criteria for MAiD, as he did not have a foreseeable death. Alan went unwillingly by ambulance to the Chilliwack Hospital, was admitted under the Mental Health Act for his own safety and his own protection after a neighbor called the RCMP for a wellness check. He asked me to bust him out, but I knew he needed medical attention. I now live every day to regret that decision. They transferred him to psychiatry the next day and gave Alan antidepressants to calm him down. He refused my visit, which was disturbing, though I trusted his medical needs were being met. We received no updates. After 8 days, his doctor said that she checked with staff, gather information, and asked me to call her back to discuss further. She vanished for a 3-week holiday. Our family was deliberately misled the next 3 weeks by his social worker, assuring us that Alan was doing well. Unknown to us then, on July 19th, an attempt to give Alan MAiD ended in failure. The hospital did not follow the prescribed MAiD protocols. No doctor was present, no family was notified, and no clear instruction where to send his body. On Monday, July 22nd, the doctor called Gary at work announcing Alan would receive MAiD that Friday. I didn't understand. He was in shock. The doctor had no answers for our questions. Alan agreed to a final visit with us. We were told not to make any waves or Alan could deny the visit. We drove 12 hours, but when we arrived, we were denied visitation. July 25th, we were finally allowed to visit Alan. He was not making any sense about the things we discussed. Fear began to grip us when our pleading and begging with medical staff to stop MAiD went unanswered. We asked for a delay as our oldest brother, Wayne, could not even be reached. Alan went into a fit of rage, screaming uncontrollably. My wife asked his doctor, "Is this what you call a sound mind?" Yet my brother's heart was stopped minutes later. Alan was depressed and did not meet the MAiD criteria. How could this have happened in our country with no written laws to protect the vulnerable or their families for this unforeseeable death? Thank you so much for allowing us to speak today.
Thank you. And now I will recognize and welcome our last testimony today, and that's from Julie Senecal.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Hi, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I have kind of a different approach to my experience, and the experience that I will bring comes from not only my experience, but various experience from people I've been with in therapy. and I told I was going to express myself in French. So if that's okay, is that okay?
By all means.
OK, donc je vais m'exprimer en français parce que c'est ma langue maternelle. Moi, j'ai eu des gros problèmes de santé mentale depuis 2013 et j'ai été suicidaire à plusieurs reprises et mon plaidoyer aujourd'hui, c'est vraiment de dire que avant d'accepter l'aide médicale à mourir pour les gens qui souffrent de santé mentale, il faut vraiment investir dans le système de santé pour aider les gens qui ont des problèmes de santé mentale à s'en sortir. Parce que j'ai été souvent à l'hôpital étant suicidaire et on m'admet à l'hôpital, on me met sur un lit. Ça prend peut-être une semaine avant de voir un psychiatre. Et quand on est médicalisé, on est retourné à la maison dans le même milieu, dans le même contexte, sans ressources. Et ça l'a pris, maintenant, moi, c'est depuis 2013, donc ça l'a pris jusqu'à l'an passé avant que je puisse avoir des ressources pour m'aider. Mais avec des ressources, avec de l'aide, en psychiatrie, en psychologie, en travail social, une approche multidisciplinaire, j'ai pu m'en sortir. Si en 2013, on m'avait demandé l'aide médicale à mourir, quand je suis rentrée à l'hôpital, je l'aurais accepté. Mais aujourd'hui, après énormément de batailles avec le système de santé, j'ai finalement réussi à avoir des ressources, même si j'ai été obligée d'aller au privé. Ça m'a coûté une fortune d'aller au privé. Mais avec des ressources, j'ai été capable de travailler sur moi. Et aujourd'hui, je peux profiter de mes 4 enfants, je peux profiter de la vie. Et je suis contente que l'aide médicale à mourir ne m'a pas été proposée en 2013. Parce que je vais avoir 50 ans bientôt, puis comme il me reste quand même une bonne partie de ma vie à vivre, puis j'ai réussi à m'en sortir. Donc, les gens qui ont des troubles de santé mentale, je peux comprendre qu'il y en a que c'est irrémédiable, mais le défi, c'est qu'il manque de ressources en amont. Il manque de ressources quand quelqu'un a des problèmes de santé mentale. Il a besoin d'aide, il a besoin d'encadrement, il a besoin d'une approche multidisciplinaire pour l'aider à s'en sortir. Et moi, c'est un peu ça mon plaidoyer aujourd'hui. Avant d'investir dans des projets de loi qui vont mettre fin à la vie à des gens qui sont en dépression, suicidaires ou quoi que ce soit, il faudrait investir pour comme les aider en amont, pour les aider à s'en sortir. Donc, si je suis encore ici aujourd'hui, c'est grâce aux efforts que j'ai faits. Moi, j'ai quand même un background en recherche, donc c'est grâce aux efforts que j'ai faits pour me trouver des ressources. Ça l'a pris plus que 10 ans. Mais aujourd'hui, je m'en sors, puis je suis encore là, puis je suis encore là pour mes 4 enfants. Donc, s'il vous plaît, investissez dans les ressources en santé mentale. Au niveau, à tous les niveaux, que ce soit travail, je l'ai déjà dit là, que ce soit au niveau travail social, psychologue, psychiatre, etc., pour aider les gens à s'en sortir. Parce que je trouve ça inacceptable que quelqu'un qui est en détresse en milieu hospitalier se fasse proposer l'aide médicale à mourir avant même de recevoir de l'aide qu'on n'a pas dans le système de la santé en ce moment. Et comme je vais le répéter, mon plaidoyer, c'est pas seulement que le mien, je côtoie énormément de gens qui sont dans des situations comme moi et le message est le même. Donc, merci de m'avoir écouté et j'espère que mon message va avoir un impact sur la loi C7.
Thank you, Julie, and the stories that we have heard today underscore the fact that instances of abuse, coercion, and non-compliance cannot be brushed under the rug. They need to be addressed, and they need to be studied. And that's something the Liberals up until now have shown absolutely zero interest in doing, while moving ahead to further expand MAiD. Further expanding MAiD without addressing cases of vulnerable Canadians falling through the cracks is nothing short of reckless, and it's why I will be we will be debating my motion next week at the Special Joint Committee, and I'm hopeful the Liberals and the senators on the committee who support the Liberals will do the right thing and support the motion so that we can hear these cases and get to the issues surrounding non-compliance. And with that, we'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you. Merci. Nous allons prendre les questions. For those journalists on the line, please use the raise hand function at this time to ask a question. Nous allons commencer par les questions dans la salle. Je reconnais Élie Quentin-Noël de True North.
Yes, good morning. When MAiD was first legalized, there were critics who had warned of a slippery slope that could eventually lead to MAiD for mental illness and also MAiD for minors. So it's currently being offered to minors in other countries, and the Senate had expanded C7 to include mental illness. So are you concerned that liberal policies on MAiD could lead to a society where dying on demand is offered in lieu of suicide prevention or therapy?
It's an important concern, and it's one that is not a concern that I'm merely expressing or MP Barrett is expressing, but it's one that virtually every national disabilities rights organization expressed when the Liberals brought forward C7 with totally inadequate consultation, total disregard for the disabilities rights community. It's a concern that has been expressed by the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities. And it is one that is drawing international headlines. Just last week, the UK Spectator published an article with the headline, "Why is Canada euthanizing the poor?" So there are very serious concerns about vulnerable people who are falling through the cracks or who could follow through the cracks, which underscores the need to ensure that there are robust safeguards, something, by the way, the Supreme Court called on Parliament to implement in the Carter decision. Robust safeguards, that's the language of the Supreme Court of Canada.
Follow-up, Elie?
All right, Bill C-14, which was the first bill to legalize MAiD back in 2016, came after the Carter case, and then Bill C-7 came after a case in the Quebec Superior Court. If the courts, which are made up of unelected judges, and a good number of them have been appointed by the Liberal government in the last few years, were to rule further extensions of MAiD to, let's say, for example, cover minors or further expand eligibility, what role would you have as elected legislators, and what would you have to do to protect these vulnerable people that could fall prey to these policies?
What the Liberals should have done in the case of Truchon is appealed the decision. Instead, they moved ahead with legislation in the face of one judge making a decision that it has profound implications. And so it's why we need to proceed cautiously. It's why we need to address existing issues of noncompliance. before moving ahead with any further expansion of MAiD. It's absolutely critical.
Abigail?
Abigail Beeman, Global News. Thanks to everybody who shared your story today. I apologize, but I have to ask on a different topic. As health critic, Mr. Barrett, the Canadian Federation of Medical Students has been on the Hill this week lobbying for universal access to contraception. The NDP put forward that suggestion last week. I'm wondering if your party supports universal free access to contraception.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And this is an issue we've heard the NDP talk about expanding pharmacare. It's part of their agreement with the government. It's not something that's come before the Health Committee for us to study, and so we'll wait and see if the NDP bring it forward to the Health Committee. But today we're laser focused on this issue and following up on the stories that we've heard from the families here today.
But do you have a position on it at this point?
It's not something that's come before the committee, and it's not something that's come before the House, and so we haven't caucused on the issue.
A few journalists are on Zoom, but I see no hand at this point, so that will put an end to this press conference. Thank you very much.